Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today we shall be talking about how to set science-based targets. If you're new to this channel, please like, share, subscribe and set your notification button so you're alerted each time a new video drops. Also connect with and follow me on LinkedIn. Subscribe to my newsletter. There you will find more explanatory notes that backs up all of the videos that I have said. So what are climate-based targets? These are greenhouse gas emission reduction goals that are in line with what climate science says that is needed to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. Why do organizations need to set science-based targets? For any organization to demonstrate their climate leadership, they need to publicly show their commitment and how ambitious they are with regards to reducing their emissions. It allows stakeholders to see the trajectory of these organizations and to see their commitment to emission reductions and to a better climate. It also allows the public to see that these people are actually not greenwashing, in quotes. These people actually have realistic targets and they also have the defined pathways that they have agreed or they have defined pathways that they want to follow to reach these targets. So it kind of boosts organizational reputation. It kind of allows people to see it black and white as opposed to just assuming that this is what these guys are saying that they are doing, but we don't even know how they are going about it. Setting science-based targets allows that public show or allows people to actually see what organizations are saying their science-based targets are and how they are able to achieve those targets. Number two, SBT allows organizations to drive innovation. So setting SBTs encourages companies to rethink their operations and find new ways to reduce emissions. Also, in order to manage climate-related risks, SBTs aligns businesses with measures that will help them future-proof their businesses against physical and regulatory impacts of climate change. How can businesses set climate-based targets? SBT has been more like driven, or I wouldn't want to use regulated, but yes, by a coalition called SBTi, Science Based Target Initiative. It's a coalition made up of CDP, the UN Global Compact, World Resource Institute, and WWF. It defines this coalition, or SBTi in short, defines and promotes best practices in SBT target settings. It also offers resources and guidance, and this coalition also assesses and approves targets set by organizations. So how can organizations set their target, or how are these targets set? Number one is to commit. These organizations will present a formal or submit a formal commitment letter to SBTi to establish what they are intending to do per their science-based targets. Once this commitment is submitted, it is reviewed and approved by SBTi, and then this organization signs the commitment letter. They have up to 2 years to develop their emission reduction targets in line with climate science that has been shown in the SBTi criteria. The link that I've listed here I would also list that in the description box below so you can see what these criteria are and see what businesses must do in order to set, or how they can set their targets against these criteria. Number three is to submit their targets that they have set for validation. So they submit back these targets after they've set them to SBTi for official approval. Number four is to communicate. This means announcing your target and informing your stakeholders about the commitments you have made and how you intend to reach these targets or to meet these science-based targets. And finally, disclose. This is simply reporting your company-wide emission and progresses against targets on annual basis. Science-based targets is highly compatible with CDPs and the greenhouse gas protocol. So it's a kind of very open and very resourceful pathway to reducing your emissions. So how do you develop a target? This is more like channeling or closing up into step two, developing a target. First of all, identify your emissions and prepare an emissions inventory. already, if you're not very familiar with the different categories of emission, please check out my YouTube posts, or check out my YouTube videos on scope 1, 2, 3 emissions to understand what each of these emissions are. In order to identify your emissions, you need to prepare an inventory, or the organization needs to prepare an inventory. An inventory is simply identifying what your emission hotspots are. Each of those hotspots, you list them out, and then identify how many or what CO2, what amount of CO2 emissions happen or occur within each of those emission categories that you've identified. So it also allows you to prepare a base year, more like a baseline year, and then your target year, what your target year is, what you're targeting to achieve by your next review year. So this is scope 1 and 2 just to give a summary. So scope 1 and 2 emissions are direct emissions from the business and are controlled by the business, that are premised in the business. So emissions like running your generators to operate your business is a scope 1 emission. Then scope 2 emission are indirect emissions from purchased electricity. So if your business relies on electricity that is generated from a different source or a different location and is transmitted to your business in order for you to operate, every part of that emission or emissions from that purchased electricity is your scope 2 emission. Scope 3 emissions are indirect emissions across your value chain, from purchased goods, business travel, waste, employee travel. There are a lot of it. I'm going to provide a more in-depth video on what scope 3 emissions are, and I'm also going to categorize the upstream and downstream scope 3 emissions to provide more context to this very large scope of emission. The the third part of this process is to prioritize. So after you've identified what your scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions are, you now prioritize what are those hotspots, what are the major sources of emissions that your business can focus on. The reason why you need to prioritize is because if you identify all of these emission hotspots and decide to go after reducing all of these emissions, you realize that there are some emission sources that are very, very, very insignificant to your business, and it might be that you're wasting resources, or you are spending more resources to reduce these emissions that really does not have impact on your business, against focusing on what the major sources are and prioritizing on them. So prioritizing allows you to really see what is most important, or those areas that are really having that high source of emission, that are really the high source of emissions to your business. So when you prioritize, it allows you focus on the largest emission sources where you can maximize impact. It's also at that point you're also able to set realistic targets within each of those emissions category and specify how your organization intends to achieve those targets. Example of these intents, or these ways that you can achieve those targets, could be you can set a target like reducing your scope 1 and 2 GHG emissions to 40% in the next 10 years. It could be increasing your renewable energy sources from 20% to 50% in the next 5 years. Just something more realistic, and most importantly, you need to communicate all of these with your stakeholders so that all of you are aligned, to avoid the organization management going in a direction and the stakeholders are saying a Z direction, and at the end of the day there is a conflict of interest or conflict of objectives. So it's always important to discuss every of these things with your stakeholders so that everybody is aligned and resources are not wasted and cost is reduced. How do you define the methods for selecting your SBT settings, so science-based target settings? How do you define the methods for these targets? There are different methods. One is the absolute emission contraction. This is about setting your targets to reduce your total overall emissions. So the absolute, you're looking at all of the emissions that you've identified as significant to your business, and now you want to reduce those emissions. Absolute emission contraction is looking at it from that angle, reducing all. Which areas do we focus on? If our target is reducing to 500 or 5,000 in the next 10 years, we have to apply it across all emissions hotspots. That is the absolute emission contraction. The second one is sectorial decarbonization approach, or intensity targets. This kind of focuses on each emission output. It could be product. You can focus on product. You can focus on revenue. You can look at which of our production generates more revenue. How much emission is emitted in this part? Is it significant to our business? Okay, if that is the case, we need to target these areas to reduce emission. It could be that a particular production which emits higher than every other production. You can decide that this is our focus, reducing emission at this point. So those kind of target settings are what we call SDA, or sectorial decarbonization approach. You can also decide to use the hybrid approach, a combination of absolute emission contraction and sectorial decarbonization approach. Also, the SBTi allows the business organizations to define their timelines, and these timelines must align with the climate science study or climate science that has been set. Is either a minimum of 5 years and a maximum of 10 years. But keep in mind that annually you need to review or need to understand what you're doing, the targets you're setting, and how it's aligned, and you're actually making impacts as opposed to just running with it till 10 years and realizing that nothing has been happening. Remember that these targets should meet the SBT criteria. There are a couple of SBT criteria. The most common of them is that emissions reduction from scope 1 and 2 must align with that climate science pathway that has been produced in order to reach 1.5 degrees Celsius. Also, carbon credits and avoidable emissions do not count towards SBT. So this part is where most people kind of tend to overlook. Yes, it's okay to go to the market and get your carbon credits, but if you want your organization to align with the SBTs, you need to understand that carbon credits and avoided emissions do not count towards SBT. In order to communicate to your stakeholders about what your SBTs are, you need to be transparent as an organization to publicly disclose your targets, to publicly disclose your progress. So transparency is number one. You also want to share your narrative. Why are you on this journey? What what is the aim? Are you doing it because every other person is doing it? Are you doing it because it's actually your business is actually contributing to climate change, and you're trying to do something to do your own part in ensuring a better climate or a sustainable climate? What is your narrative? Also, engage. You need to engage everybody in the business. It can't be a top thing. It has to be, I would say, a bottom to top thing. Involve the departments, involve the employees, involve your customers, understand what your partners are saying, because indirectly what you're doing to reduce emissions in your business contributes down your value chain or down your supply chain. If you're a vendor and you're actively doing all you can to reduce emissions, especially using science-based targets, your customer also feeds from your emissions reduction, and that also reduces their emissions indirectly. This is where you start talking about the scope 3 value chain emission assessment or calculation. So engage everybody involved in your business to make sure that you're not on this journey alone. You're also carrying people along. Implementing your SBTs is important to develop your action plan, outline your specific initiatives and investments, and integrate your targets into your business strategies and your operations. It's not a standalone thing. It has to be integrated across board. So whatever you're doing in each part of the business is also being felt in another part of the business. Also allocate budgets and get leadership buy-in. It is very important. Leadership needs to understand the environmental impact of your business, like the narrative we talked about earlier. Why are you doing this? What are the benefits to our business? What are the benefits to our stakeholders? You need to get the leadership buy-in, and in that way you are on a successful journey and not on your own. Also remember to monitor and report your SBTs. Regularly track emissions, set metrics and KPIs that will allow you really have a measurable impact. Also disclose your achievements, disclose your challenges in your report, so people are seeing more realistic things as opposed to more wishy-washy. When you have what your achievements are, describe what your challenges are, you'll be able to people will be able to understand where you're headed in your journey. Review update your targets over time and over time. It's possible that we've set a target like by the next year, this is what we intend to achieve. 6 months or 8 months down the line, it's possible that we didn't achieve this, and there is need to recalibrate. There is need to check again. Is there something we're not doing right? In that way, you'll be more in control, or more, yeah, you'll be more in control and more aligned to where you're headed. So this, I think, is really the basis for SBT. I'll put a link in the description box if you need more in depth to understand overall what SBTs are and how to set those targets and the importance of them. Thank you for watching, and bye for now.